Mr. David Lattizori, welcome to the Rich Equation podcast.
Good to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I'm so excited for this. I feel like I need to tell the audience that David and I have a long history. We went to college together, and I haven't seen or maybe even spoken to you like this in this format for almost 15 years.
It's been a long time. Well worth the wait.
Well worth the wait. We've been both on our own journeys, so I'm excited to unpack yours today and get all the nuggets of knowledge and wisdom. I remember, David, actually we were close in college, and we spent a lot of time together, and life kind of takes you in different directions, and that's just how it goes. But I remember David, the one thing I remember most about David was he used to be the guy in the gym that used to do crunches upside down on a bar.
I'm still that guy.
You're still that guy. And everyone else would look at David like, what the hell is wrong with that guy? He used to do pull-ups upside down with his legs above the bar.
Yeah, with like 25 pounds of weight hanging underneath me, just because, I'm a 90-pound weakling. But
you like to torture yourself, my friend.
Yeah, it hasn't stopped.
It hasn't stopped, I know. So you have a really rich, beautiful story, and you're, right before we started recording, you were telling me kind of where you're at and what you're focusing on, which I definitely want to get to, but I'd like to kind of unpack the whole story, because it's a really beautiful journey that you've been on. So I'd love you to kind of walk us through that. And I have some specific points where I want to slow down and go a little bit deeper during the journey, but I want to kind of go back like right sort of in our mid-20s, early mid-20s, where you're kind of figuring it out. You're helping your dad in the real estate business. I want to talk more about your dad and his legacy and his journey and what you've kind of done from there. And so let's just start there.
Yeah, I was very lucky that I feel like real estate has been running in my blood for a long time. And my dad was a real estate developer, kind of rags to riches story. And he, unfortunately, for better or for worse, wasn't the best teacher. He was more like, you'll figure it out. And so I kind of learned through just listening and watching and through osmosis. And during college, when we were together, I tried to do everything not to kind of get into the small family business. And I got job offers at dream firms all across the country, which was a tough time in 2008 when we graduated. It was the first time in Boston University's history that they actually canceled all our career fairs. So to think that I had a job and a dream job at that was really a blessing. And then right after I accepted that, my dad had some health issues. So I came back at 21 to little old Mystic, Connecticut, which is near and dear to my heart, but a big change from the Big Apple, which is where I was heading. And I spent the next few years kind of taking care of my dad. He eventually passed away when I was 27. And I guess it's tough. I mean, I always thought he would kind of be there mentoring me and by my side. And then all of a sudden, I'm the guy there by his side. And I was the kid who was there every day, helping him learn how to walk and eat and take care of him. And so it was at that age to see someone you love, and we were best friends, kind of passed away was really difficult. My dad used to always have his saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think you got to take from that experience the blessing that life is short, and you got to really live life to the fullest. And I've always felt, follow your dreams the best you can and fake it till you make it, because I knew nothing about nothing. So long story short, my dad had a piece of property for 15 years. It was his dream to develop it. And for 15 years, he got shot down by neighbors and business groups and the leadership in our town. And he kind of lost a small fortune. And after he passed away, he gifted that property to my sister and I. And I was honestly going to sell it, either donate it to a land trust or sell it to a developer at a huge loss. And literally a week before I was going to sign that contract, I got a call from my neighbors across the street who were against my dad for 15 years and said, "Have you thought of something better for this site?" And I said, "I have, but I just don't think there's a future, and I don't want to repeat the mistakes of my father." And they said, well, have you thought of this? And they proposed something outlandish that, of course, only favored them. And I said, well, that makes a lot of sense, but I have to make the numbers work, and there's a lot that goes into this. So anyways, that night I called my sister and I said, I think we can do something with the farm. This was vacant farmland right in downtown Mystic, which is a really desirable coastal town. No one has heard of it. And I said, I think we got a shot. And she said, well, Dad would want you to go for it. And so anyways, that kicked off 2 years of meetings with town leaders and business officials and police commissions, fire departments, economic development commissions, wetland groups, conservation groups, traffic commissions. I mean, everyone had an input on this project.
And it was the biggest property built in that area ever at that time.
Ever, and it will be, because there's no land left. So this was a really critical piece left. And it was important because a lot of people had impacts. I think being a real estate developer is probably one of the most challenging careers you could possibly have. And the reason is because every decision is not really made by you. It's made by a group of your peers, right? And they may be professionals like those sitting on the Water Pollution Control Authority. They could be just volunteers who are on planning and zoning, or they could be people passionate about conservation causes, which is why they're on the Wetlands Commission. And you have to go before all these groups and they have to sign off. And then if you somehow get it approved like I did, you have to convince a bank. And then you have to convince the market. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I was able to make it all happen somehow. The stars and moon aligned.
And that was your last project.
That was my last project. And I'm gearing up for the next phase.
And the next phase. Let's go back, because I think, why, I know that your dad was in the real estate business. Did you feel like that was a natural progression for you? Did you have any other desire to do anything else? Or you were like, no, I got to just carry the torch here and lean into this? Because you're right, development is not for everybody, and it is lonely. We can talk about that too, the lonely journey of an entrepreneur. And losing your dad at 27 is I can't even imagine, right? It's just so lonely. It can get lonely, right? So,
yeah. I've always thought of myself not as a real estate developer, but as an entrepreneur. And I started an app that I launched at South by Southwest right around late 20s. And I bought a small government contracting business with a buddy of mine. And now I have another tech company on the side. But real estate is just something that kind of came naturally to me. It made a lot of sense. And my initial thought was start with something small and manageable. So I wanted to do spec houses in Los Angeles, which is an incredibly competitive and complicated environment. Because I'm a design guy, I think good design wins. And I read like 4 or 5 design magazines and housing magazines, and I'm on House all the time. And so I ended up designing like a high-end spec house in California in Venice. And I thought I was going to be doing that. And then as I kind of said, what could I do that's a little bigger, these commercial opportunities came up.
And how did you kind of learn the skills, or what group of people did you have around you? So all these people, you're trying to develop something in LA is almost impossible, especially in Venice and the beach counties. I mean, they talk about developing real estate in California. It takes 5 to 10 years just to get a blessing or an approval, right? How did you learn the resiliency of the mindset to deal with no's and people always telling you, oh no, David, this is not going to happen, or this is not going to happen, or we're not going to allow this, we're not going to allow that?
Yeah, right after I finished building this house in Venice, the Wall Street Journal, literally the week later, came out with an article saying Venice is the most difficult place in the country to build, right? It's in a coastal zone, it's in a mellow zone, it's an affordable housing zone, it's in a Venice neighborhood design district. I'm building on a walk street, tight, narrow corridors, which is now a historic district. And I didn't have the money to hire like an expediter or to hire an attorney. But luckily I am an attorney. And when you're working with the government or in real estate, everything's written down in a zone. And so I read all the zones. I ended up buying drafting paper and I designed the house that I'm living in now. And I hired a contract architect to put it into CAD. And then I handled most of the approvals to bring it through. And then I worked partnership with a GC to save some money and kind of supered the project on my own to learn how to do it. So it was really kind of fake it till you make it.
Figure it out.
Exactly. You're hiring people to help you, right? So they aren't partners. They're also there to profit off of you. But you have to find a way to limit them taking you for all you're worth and working with them to achieve your goals. And that was like my life, right? Like when there was a problem, like that was my whole to-do list for that day, was to try and solve it. And somehow, reasonable minds always prevail, and you always find a way to get through it. That isn't always the case, but I've found that it's in everyone's best interest to move something forward. And so that's
what were some of the hardest things that you faced, and what were the lessons there?
Yeah, the two big projects that I did, I built a shopping center and I built this big mixed-use development, which consists of medical and apartments and townhouses and things like that. The biggest thing is that, when I built this house in Venice, what you can do and can't do is specifically identified in the zoning regs, right? So as long as you stay within that metric, the city's supposed to approve it, right? But with my other two projects, the uses I was proposing weren't allowed in that zone, or they didn't even exist. So in the shopping center that I built, that use wasn't allowed there. So I spent like a year working with neighbors and community leaders to kind of amend the zone to allow for the types of uses that I proposed. And then when I went to meet with the town for my larger project, they said, there's no zone in town that allows for medical, that allows for open space, conservation, and residential. And I said, well, why not? They said, well, it hasn't been created yet. So I hired a draftsman attorney and I wrote the zone. It's called the Greenway Development District. And what it does is it preserves farmland while also encouraging development. And now variations of that zone are used to revitalize farms all throughout kind of Connecticut now, that framework. So it just didn't exist, right? And so we wrote it down, we got it adopted by the town and the plan of development, and moved forward on it.
I love that, man. What's next?
Well, I think it's interesting. In my mind, I feel like I'm a complete failure, and I compare myself to everyone who's way more successful than me. And in my mind, I'm like, I gotta still make it work and push myself, but I could also lose it all. So it's a balancing act. I got approval to build another 123 apartments on my site and expand the medical center that I built for Hartford Healthcare. And both of those are going forward. It's just tough in this current economy, kind of what going forward looks like or when that may happen.
So kind of slowing down, thinking about what to do next, taking care of yourself, working on you.
Yeah, these projects really take a piece of you. They don't just take a piece of your heart. They take a piece of your life, right? And I gave up there's a reason why I'm single and, can't find a girl to save my life. It's because I gave up my whole life to take care of my family, number one, take care of my dad and our family, and to see this project go through. And it takes a lot of time. It's crazy to think I'm going to be giving up another few years of my life at age 37, right? Like my life may not fully be starting till I'm 48, but then till I'm 40. But then when I'm 40, who knows, another project may come around. So I think it's important to have balance, right? And that's what I've always tried to do throughout all these projects. And it's helped me manage stress as well along the way.
Yeah. How are you managing stress now? What have you learned about?
I don't have as much stress in my life as I used to, but it's stressful thinking about the next move because it's the unknown, right?
Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about these projects. I may jinx myself, but when I did my project, everyone told me no, and we got through it and somehow we succeeded. But the day I opened the doors was the first day of the shutdown of COVID-19. And I said, well, how are people going to move into a new apartment? Everyone broke their pre-leases, and how do I keep my staff safe, right? As if I break ground into this year in my new project, right, what's going to happen in 2024, 2025? Are we going to go into recession? Are rents going to support the project? So there's a lot of risk involved. And so when I think of that, I go on a run or I mountain bike or I cycle or I go on a run skiing and I say, I just got to solve one problem during this day. And I focus on one thing.
I love that.
And that's all it is. I can't focus on more than one.
And you're a big outdoors guy. You're skiing, you're running, you're sailing, you're love to be outside. Has that always been part of you, or is that new habits and new hobbies?
Yeah, my mom actually set aside a good schedule when I was young, and that was like, come home from school and you got to do your homework immediately. So I would get home from school and I'd immediately do my work. And then I'm like, I got to get out of here because I'm like stressed of 2 hours of doing homework. So I go mountain biking or paddleboarding or sailing or fishing. And for me, it's a time to unwind, right? Because when you're skiing, and I do a lot of tough terrain, you're purely in the moment, right? You're purely in the present. I've done trails that are like no fall zones. So you fall, you die. So you're not thinking about work or planning boards or girls or life. You're just thinking about living, right? So it's a time to fully detach. And for me, that's been really reinvigorating.
I think there's a message there, and I think there's a metaphor there too, that I think even as a developer, as an entrepreneur, we can get really distracted with all the things in our life. But if we just solve one problem at a time and stay present, whether it's at home or with our families or problems we're dealing with our business, I know I'm really victim to that it's hard for me to think about one problem at a time or one issue at a time. Trying to solve everything, trying to deal with 5 days instead of just today, right?
Yeah, I see it I've always felt the key to a successful relationship is 80% listening, right? So I've always tried to listen to my friends. The issue is that a lot of times they kind of go off the deep end, right? Like when they have these problems, they sit at home and their mind is just churning on every single variable that could happen, right? And they end up just becoming like a hamster that's constantly running in place, right? It's not moving anywhere. And if you do that and you just like broil in your own thoughts, I don't think it does anyone good. I think it's good to like get out there and be active and release some endorphins. Think about one thing, right? If you can simplify to the biggest problem, you come back and you're only focusing on that one thing, which is usually achievable. But when you go too far down the line, well, it's just, you're too far off the rails, and who knows what's going to happen 5 decisions down. So it's important to focus on what's right in front of you.
Through all the projects you've done and all the challenges, what have you learned the most about yourself?
What I've learned is that I'm like a meat and potatoes guy. So I love listening to tech people. I love listening to super successful entrepreneurs, but like I've never had that luck, right? Every stage of all my developments is someone telling me no, right? It's been no because the regulation didn't exist. It's been no because it's not serviced by sewer, or like the pump isn't sufficient enough to carry the water flow capacities. It's been no because of environmental issues or drainage issues or changes in deep standards, right? It's been no because of no reason. I don't like it. I don't want it in my neighborhood. I like seeing it the way it is, or I don't like, if that's your version of progress, that's not what I see. And, if you're an entrepreneur and you're dealing in tech, you can engineer a solution, right? But I'm dealing with like terra firma, right? There's only so much you can do, right? And you have to work within this constrained environment. And if you are building a product or something like that, if it's a good product, it's going to sell. Like people are going to figure out a way. But like for me, someone could sue me and stop the entire project. There could be a vendetta out for a councilman to like appease their base. And for some reason, they decide arbitrarily the project isn't for them. So for me, I've always been meat and potatoes. Like, how can I just practically get through this? And, I have to rely on professionals like architects and engineers and civil engineers and landscape architects and engineers, right? They've been designing the same problem for 30 years. So they can't think outside of the box. So I come in and I go, well, have you thought of this? And they go, no, because we've been designing it this way. I go, well, there is another solution from talking to people. And then they figure it out. So a lot of the times people can't see the forest through the trees. And I think I've always been able to get above that, listen to what's going on and come up with the best solution.
it's a good point, because I think there's a lot of things in the world that are stuck, right? And I've experienced this in my business. Where does your source of inspiration come from? Where does that source of either wisdom or courage or power or creativity, where does that come from? Is it from being in nature or something else?
No, it comes from surviving. I mean, when I was taking care of my dad, who was sick for many years, and my mom and I always said, we've buried dad 6 times. Like I've seen him pass away almost 6 times. He's somehow come through it all. And, when you're home alone and this was 2008 when it kind of started, the real estate crisis. I'm trying to manage our business, which we're aging and weren't online or digital. And, I redid 186 units, going in saying that if we didn't, improve, then we were just going to die. And then as I was building my business, the only alternative to not succeeding was bankruptcy or failure. And I almost went bankrupt twice for reasons outside of my control. And you just get through it. I mean, it's sink or swim. And I've always felt it comes down to what power do you have over yourself, right? And I feel you got to accomplish you just got to be good at one thing in your life, right? Just to give you confidence, number one. But I think it's important to have power over you physically. Like I couldn't run a mile to save my life, but I came back from college and there's nothing to do. I said, I'm going to try to run a mile. And I'd run like quarter of a mile and get a cramp, and another quarter mile, my knee's hurting me. And now, the most I've ever run is over 30 miles, right? When I went into the gym, I couldn't even lift the barbell, right? And then within a year, I was doing more than my own body weight. So I think when you can overcome your own physical limitations, then nothing is uncharted, nothing you can't overcome. And as long as you have your health and you have friends and family, then you have it all.
What I love about your story, and there's a lot of similarity to my story too, is we didn't know anything about our industries or our businesses out of school, right? Maybe you grew up around entrepreneurs, or you knew about real estate as a category, and you grew up around your dad doing it, and so did I. But you weren't a specialty, you weren't educated in it in any way. And I think being an entrepreneur is more about the resilience of the humanity of a person than it is about the skill sets or the knowledge or the process. In fact, I had a friend tell me the other day, he's like, stop reading entrepreneurship books. Just stop it. Because being an entrepreneur is already inside of you. You need to start reading other things. Read about art, read about being in nature, read about music, read about philosophy. Stop reading about how to be a better business person, because that part of you is natural. It's not something that continues to need to be cultivated. It's the other parts of you that you need to explore to make you a better business person. I thought that was a fascinating idea or concept, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've never read a business book. I've never read an entrepreneurship book. I couldn't tell you. Do I like reading? I try to read 3 books at a time. So I read one uplifting book, right? Like something that I think I can grow from, which is not entrepreneurship because that seems boring to me. And then I read one intellectually stimulating book, usually a history type book, autobiography. And then I read one fluff like Nicholas Sparks or something. You need good balance in your life. But, the key to success as an entrepreneur is your personal network.
Yeah.
Number one, you can't do it all on your own, right? You need to lean on those connections. And so you have to do that from a young age, and it's listening, right? And I think if you can get that through just reading a book, well, then that's incredibly valuable. I should be reading that stuff. I haven't had the direct need for it, but I'm sure I would learn a lot.
Tell me about your daily routine. What keeps you at this level as frequently and consistently?
Yeah, I try to always be up around 6:30, and I like to get into work immediately. I have a big breakfast, and at 6:45 or maybe 6:35, I'm answering emails. I'm in it, I'm making breakfast, I'm doing whatever. And then I work straight to 9:30. So I'm getting 3 hours of work in straight. And I'm in a sleep daze. I probably shouldn't even be allowed to be answering emails. And then I go to the gym. And it's kind of nice because like all those emails from 6 to 9:30 of like people are slowly getting back to me while I'm at the gym from like 9:30 to 10:30. And I get all that stress out, right? And I can answer little emails at the gym. And then I come back and I work straight to like 2:33. And then, there's going to be end of day emails. So I get out again. I go paddleboarding, I go mountain biking, I go running, I play around at golf. I don't know, whatever. And then I get back at like 4:30 and I get end of emails, and then I work however late I got to work till.
You're just going, bro. You're just grinding.
Yeah, I eat super healthy, and I think that I always keep moving. I think that's kind of the goal of life.
Yeah, you always have been. What are you eating? What's the nutrition diet right now?
For me, I broke my leg skiing like a year ago now.
I think I saw that, yeah.
And and I was always a guy who, granted, I couldn't run a mile, I couldn't lift anything, but I got through it all. Like everyone's like, oh, it comes easy to you. But I had to really push myself. And now it does come easy. For like 15 years, I'm in very athletic shape. And then all of a sudden a year ago, I couldn't walk. It was like really humbling. It was like psychological shock, because I've always had my health, right? And even if I went bankrupt, which almost happened, at least I'd be healthy. I'd figure it out. But I worked hard and I built that muscle again. And within like 3-4 months, I was running 5Ks and beating most of my friends. And now I'm heading off skiing for a little bit. So it's just getting back to where I was originally.
Fear, and you mentioned this about the story with your dad, is I think fear can be a really crippling thing. And you have built a resilience against fear, probably in a really difficult, some of the worst ways people can build resilience to fear. It's either life or death, right? For you. What advice do you have for people to face their fears and to deal with adversity, if perhaps it's not the most extreme circumstance?
It's interesting. When I almost went bankrupt because in order to make all this work, I had to get a HUD loan, which is a government-backed loan. And they encourage developers to build housing where it's difficult, right? Because I met with 5 banks and every bank said, nope, the market doesn't work. You don't have the money. You're too young. And the government was able to work with me. The problem is I got caught in the government shutdown, which who knew the government would shut down, and who knew it would be the longest government shutdown in history. And as a result, I couldn't pick up the phone and call someone to get the loan proceeds. Everyone thinks it's the developer that decides to proceed on these projects. It's not, it's the bank. The bank will tell you whether you can move forward and it makes sense or not. And in the government shutdown, we couldn't close on our loan and we couldn't get the money. And we had kind of already started out of survival because we were going to lose our site contractor. We had winter coming in. We wouldn't opened up on time. And I literally was 2 days away from having $2 million in liens filed on our project, which would have been the biggest failure in our town's history. I'm the biggest taxpayer. We had over 150 people on site. I would have been liable for tens of millions of dollars of loans and people's livelihood, including my own. And my dad used to say, everything you can learn in life, you can read in the Wall Street Journal, okay? But I also think you got to add in the New York Times Sunday edition. And I'd always try to read the New York Times Sunday edition. And they always interview a successful entrepreneur. And this one guy, he owns a VC firm and entrepreneur, whatever. And he said, you know what? As an entrepreneur, when you're succeeding, you will, and I'm paraphrasing, you will feel like you can walk on water. You will feel so good, like nothing can go wrong. And then all of a sudden, pardon my French, shit happens. And you will feel like death incarnate and you can never crawl out. But he said, just remember, it's never as bad as you think it is. And every time something terrible has happened to me, it's never been the worst thing. I've always crawled out. So even though, my dad passed away right before me and I took care of him for a long time, I learned about me and about family. And, people pass on. It's a natural process of life, right? Death. And then building these companies, right? You just have to go for it. And like I said before, reasonable minds will prevail and you're going to get through it. If you have that tough breakup, there's fish in there's other fish in the sea. Like, you're going to find someone else. So you just have to be optimistic.
I love it. I love it. What else, my friend?
You're the interviewer.
I feel like, what do you hope? I think we could both agree that your dad has been a big inspiration to you. He's probably looking down on you, really proud. You've done so much for your town, your family, the community. You've probably accomplished things that no one even dreamed of in that, in Mystic, which is not a huge city, not a huge town, right? And so what do you hope to leave behind? What do you hope that your legacy is?
I feel I'm too young to be answering that question, but
well, I know you're probably right, but I know you enough to know that you're thinking about it. So,
it's interesting. The biggest compliment someone can give me professionally is that, wow, Dave's really smart.
Ooh.
Like that to me, I'm like, wow, am I that smart? I don't think I am. But if someone says that, I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right. And everyone who's worked with me or for me said, it's been a pleasure working with me, right? Or I've had friends saying, which means I probably should be tougher on them. And then I have friends say, like, you're a great friend. Like, you've always been there, right? And I've had friends who haven't been there for me. So I've said, I've always wanted to be there for them. So I just want people to remember me as someone who was smart, someone who gave back their time and was like a good person, right? And I want to, as a developer, you want to create things that have a lasting impact on the community. And I think that's what I've done so far.
I love it, man. As we wrap up, I want to ask you a final question. For you, what does it mean to live a rich life?
See, I should have watched your other podcasts because then I would be prepared for this answer. See, I don't do any research. That's a problem I'm all gut. But if I were to go by my gut, I would say now all anyone does is look at this. Their whole life is defined within 7 inches. And life is a lot bigger than that. And I think in order to taste the sweet nectars of life, you've got to get out there. You have to say yes, right? You can't find excuses to not do something. You have to find excuses to do something. And the key to life is no regrets. When my dad was sick, we had 2 other family members, immediate family members, pass away during that time. We had some other family members who had some other personal struggles. And every time when I was talking to my aunt and she was almost on her deathbed, she said, I have no regrets. I've led a rich life and I don't want any regrets on my deathbed. And I have very few regrets. If I continue living life like that, then on my deathbed, I will have said I've lived a rich life.
I love it. I love it, brother. Well, I'm proud of you, man. It's been an awesome journey to watch you in your own journey. And, you've flourished so much and you have so much more to give. And I love your perspective, which is why I wanted you on the podcast today. And I just can't wait to keep watching, bro.
Well,
let's have more intermittent coffee breaks though. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm down.
Well, pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.